New START treaty will be discussed as well. That's why the US and Russia have not decided what to do. So they would pretend that they will disarm, but my prediction is that the new START treaty is history as well. And I even would say President Trump would announce it already before the election that he will not continue with the START treaty after it expires in 2021. So President Trump doesn't like treaties which limit US capabilities, and now they are free to develop ICBMs as well in number and quality, technological quality, and so they might also, it might be a danger for Asia and Europe as well, because then the number of targets could be increased, and yeah, okay, that's. I can continue, but if you.
Oh yeah. So it's kind of a shocking situation, but so you very pessimistic of the disarmament of the world.
Yeah, it's even worse than during the Cold War. It's worse because during the Cold War we did have these treaties, we did have these arms control negotiations, so. They did not disarm except the INF Treaty, but they provided the possibility that each other can somehow get information about the other side, and that's not happening now. And also we had a political instrument during the Cold War, especially after 1975. There's the CSE, and the CSE, which brought huge détente policy. So the Helsinki document doesn't mention height of the Cold War, enemy, foe, adversary, opponent. There's nothing in there. They speak of cooperative security. Security is indivisible. Economic cooperation. No change of borders, no threat of military intervention. That's all not what we have now. So we have all kinds of this blame game, demonization of other states, no multilateral or even bilateral negotiations. So it's more likely, if I can draw an analogy, more likely in the second half of the 19th century situation what we have now before the First World War. So
today is the 70th anniversary of the NATO, also the 30th anniversary of the end of the Cold War. But I think the NATO has also facing a lot of issues. Recently, the French President Macron said about the brain death situations. Now, how do you see about the current NATO situation?
On the positive note, NATO always has been very flexible in adapting to new situations. So, new threats, new challenges, NATO reacted somehow. But that cannot cover up now anymore the frictions within NATO. There were always frictions. And after the end of the Cold War, we had this debate of the new NATO, which was supposed to be a global NATO, doing crisis management, cooperative security, and not only collective defense, that means territorial defense according to Article 5 of the NATO treaty. But after the Ukraine crisis and Russian intervention in the Crimea and the civil war in eastern Ukraine, NATO changed again back to this original mission, collective defense. So it was directed against Russia, but other countries do not share that much. So it's not so. The southern flank of NATO is more concerned with the south and not so much with the east. No? And so we have these two fractions in NATO already. But now NATO is doing everything to keep the Russian threat alive, to get some unity against Russia. Even so, I think it's not really. There is no threat perception behind this, because Russia's defense expenditures are only 7% of those of NATO. So Russia is no real danger for Europe. Russia is not going to invade Europe. Of course, Russia is a nuclear power. That's we have this global concept of deterrence, but nobody wants to start a nuclear war unless something happens. But then we have the INF deployment here. So, so NATO, and this Russian threat is supported mainly by Baltic states, Poland, but also by Germany. But it's not really the issue what will endure very long. Because, of course, NATO wants its members to increase defense spending. And if you have a threat, you're supposed to increase your defense spending, which is not necessary for NATO, I would say, because NATO countries spend already 55% of the global military expenditure. So why should NATO increase its defense spending? But now, as I said, NATO is flexible. They're already looking for new challenges. And the new challenges out there are cyberspace, space, and in this connection also China. China is seen as especially in the cyberspace, as a challenge for NATO. Of course, there are very dangerous possibilities involved, because in 2016, I guess, NATO linked Article 5 commitments to cyber. But you never can attribute a real cyber attack clearly to somebody. Cyber attack can come from everywhere. But then, of course, they will involve intelligence agencies and say, okay, we know exactly it comes from there. You never can know exactly where it comes from. But then if Article 5 will be implemented, all the NATO member states might be obliged to use military force against this threat. This can be Russia, it can be China, it can be North Korea, Iran. It can be somewhere else. So that's so China's space and cyberspace and space are the new challenges. China so far is not really a NATO issue. Of course, we have this Belt and Road Initiative from China, but that's economically so far. So that's not a security issue. So it's 90% infrastructure investment. And of course, people say countries participating in this Belt and Road Initiative, they might have benefits, but they might increase the debts as well. And then China might be able to increase political pressure on these countries. But it's not a security issue so far. It's the only military base China linked to this Belt and Road is in Djibouti. So in Djibouti, China was building this, but it's nothing else so far.
But how about this political and economic issues, economic aspect? So you saw some influence by China or Russia in the East European country and Balkan area.
Talking about, especially about the smaller states in between East and West. So that's the OSCE, the Organization on Security and Cooperation in Europe, issued a report in 2015 where they called the states the in-between states. They neither belong to the West nor to the east. They have to develop